Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Draft Capital here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and again, I am without co-host Chris LeBron. I'm not going to share the details as to why he's not on the show. It's not really my place, but if you follow Chris and you're familiar with him and you love him just as much as I do, just prayers for him and his family. Reach out to him. I'm sure all the positive vibes and thoughts and prayers would do him a well of good right now, but you're not in bad hands because I don't think I would ever come on here by myself. I got a great guest lined up today, and you're familiar with our guest if you follow Chris and I. We've each had him on our individual shows. We actually had his co-host on earlier in the season, but now we have the Wolf of Ball Street, or one of the Wolves of Ball Street here, Mr. Corey Tulaba. Corey, what's up, man? How you doing?
Steven, appreciate you having me on, man. It's I've been obviously tuning in every week and watching all the guests and listening, and it's been I'm happy that you guys have entered the space. I'm happy to be on the show. I'm ready to have an awesome conversation. Just chop it up on some draft.
Yeah, man, it's we're honored to have you. Chris and I were sharing on our last show that you kind of hold a special place in both of our hearts. You're one of the first draft guests that we've had on our NBA shows, and stuff like that just sticks with you. You kind of have like your dudes as you continue to go through the podcasting process and stuff like that. And obviously we've been able to reach out to other folks, especially more of your teammates over at No Ceilings, and have them on, man. But we were so excited when you agreed to come on, man, because again, as we started going through our podcasting process, you were one of the first ones to say, yeah, I'll make an appearance, and it's made a big difference to both of us, man. So before we get into today's show, just want to open up with you, man. Just how you been, man? How's everything going? You're taking off with this No Ceilings collective. What's that going like for y'all?
Well, yeah, and you mentioned last episode, you guys were so you've always been so supportive, and the words that you guys said about myself and everybody else at No Ceilings, and even in the draft community, is doesn't go unnoticed, and is something I really dig about you guys. No Ceilings has been going way better than I ever could have imagined it going this quickly into the process. When we started the idea of it, Tyler Rucker and I, we were just talking about working together kind of as a team, along with Albert maybe. And then I was like, let's make it like a team and, let's go recruit some other guys. And the way it's all come together has been beyond my wildest expectations because, we've put out at least one piece of written content every day since October 25th, at least every weekday.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're putting out 2 to 3. And the whole goal behind it is to kind of show that this niche that we are covering, this draft niche, is you can go so in depth with it that you can cover it daily. It is something that you can really, really always find something to talk about because everything is so fluid. It changes so much. And we wanted to take the white space in this draft sphere and say, how do we cover something so in depth while speaking to the everyday person? And we're not doing it in a way that dumbs it down and looks down upon and tries to simplify everything. We're doing really in depth analysis and content, but we're doing it in a way that is, I think, easy to understand. So when we do go in depth, we're trying to educate and teach rather than talk down to, be pretentious. We don't need to use a bunch of buzzwords to make it sound like we know what we're talking about.
Sure.
We want to prove that we're putting in the work daily, and that if you go to the Substack and you subscribe and you get it straight to your email, it's worth it because what we're doing is something that nobody else is doing. Nobody is doing content every single day on the NBA draft. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and we support all of it, but nobody is doing it like we are. And we found that space. And I'm so proud of the entire team. Proud of my guy Albert. Your first guest from the No
That
Ceilings
was
crew,
huge,
off on
man.
his
I
own,
was
man.
I was so happy to have him on, dude, because one, I tell everyone this, right? Like, I'm a fan of you guys first. Like, the fact that that you'll even talk draft with me is just a plus. I'm just a fan of the Draft Act podcast. And I have your magazines over here. Like I'm kind of a stalker, Corey. I hope that you know that walking away. I probably know your address. Just kidding, but still, but having Albert on the show was a big deal, man, because I love listening to him. He's kind of the sweetheart of the show, if I'm allowed to say that. But
Absolutely.
I love listening to y'all too, man, and having you on. And we're collecting all the No Ceilings team like Infinity Stones almost in
Yes.
the gauntlets. We've had almost all you guys on, and as soon as we get all you guys on the show, we're gonna take off. But glad to have you on, and just proud to know you and all the guys on the team and all the great work that you've done. So we're going to get into the show here in just a second, but before we do, I want to remind everyone that support for Draft Capital is brought to you by Built Bar. And unlike all the other bars that are out there that taste either like old Play-Doh or a piece of cardboard, when you eat a Built Bar, you will think that you're cheating on your diet with a delicious chocolate dessert. If your kids find out how good these things are, you're going to have to buy even more of them because they're going to be begging for them. They have great flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, strawberry. Plus, they even have a mystery flavor that if you guess correctly, you can win a prize. Just go over to built.com, buy whatever you want. And because we're such good friends with the folks over there, we'll hook you up with a 10% discount if you use promo code OFFTHEBALL. That's OFFTHEBALL. At checkout, you get a 10% discount at built.com. All right, Corey. So we paid the bills. We'll get into the show now. We got a player that I'm super stoked to talk to you about because one of the coolest things about just talking draft with people in general, Corey, and I'm sure that you talk about this all the time, right, is
Yes.
you're not always going to see eye to eye with people. And that's the fun part, right? Like we can talk
100%.
about how great, Chet Holmgren or Paulo Banchero or now Jabari Smith Jr. We can watch that guy and we're like, okay, like this is a really good basketball player. But we can get into a guy that we're going to be talking about now. And we can both watch him and you could be super high on him as you are. And I can be, I'm not going to say I'm not as high on him as probably the proper way to say it. I'm not down on him because
Right.
Corey, I'm sure you're like this too. You can watch 60 dudes and like even love the 60th best player out of all of those guys, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
emotionally invested in Will Richardson. He's not even in my top 100, right? So I love him. So the fact that I have, this guy, Jaime Jaquez Jr. out of UCLA, I have him lower than you. Doesn't mean that I'm hating on him, quote unquote, but
Yeah.
I don't see him in the same light as you. So I want to open up with him because I think this is going to be the most fun part of the show. So when you watch Jaime Jaquez Jr., Corey, what about him tells you that he's a first round level talent?
Personally, he's a big eye test guy for me, and I'm really big. One of the things I look for in prospects is kinesthetics, like how do they move? Because there are some guys that are very fluid, natural movers. There are other guys that look like they've been training one-on-one. You put them in a 5-on-5 situation and everything's a little clunky. The thought processing is a little slower. Like Jaquez Jr. to me, the dude he passes the eye test, whether that's physically, which I think that his body is NBA ready, or just the way he moves on the court. Like when I watch him, the first thing I thought of, I was like, he kind of moves a little bit like Gordon Hayward. Now, when I throw out a comp, I'm not actually giving a one-to-one comparison as to how this
Sure.
person's career is going to play out. And when I say Gordon Hayward, I kind of mean the post-injury, kind of like Boston, Charlotte version that's wasn't as athletically gifted as he was earlier in his career. Now, I don't think Jaquez is a minus athlete. I think he's a good athlete, a very good athlete, an underrated athlete, but he's fluid and he just does so many things on the basketball court that lead to winning. And when you look at his track record, you understand, okay, this is why one of the reasons he went deep into the tournament last year. It wasn't just that that Juzang got super hot, right? Jaquez Jr. was a big part of that run as well, and he's been, in my opinion, he's the best player on the team this year on a loaded team. So I think if you put him in a different situation, his scoring numbers would probably be a little bit higher. But he plays within the team construct, and he's got a loaded team that's looking to make another deep run. And I think they're going to because they have a bunch of players that have a winning mentality.
Yeah, that's true. And, I'm looking at the numbers that I have in front of him. And if you got different numbers, Corey, feel free just to kind of jump in and let me know if you got different specs for him. But I have him at about 6'6" ish, maybe
Yep.
plus or minus an inch or two there,
Yep.
around 225, right? So he projects as, to me, Corey, as more of a perimeter oriented guy. Do you see him giving any versatility to maybe even play a little bit as like a small ball four type player, or do you see him solely basically operating on the perimeter?
No, I think he's going to be a 3-4
Okay.
in the NBA. I think he is, and I think that he's got the body for it. I think he'll be athletic enough for it. I think, look, the NBA, the size is fluid now, man. Like
Sure.
you you use, Rashad's position dictionary a lot. Like traditional, the way we look at different positions are no more. Even whether you use Rashad's or not, like, to me, he's a swing wing. He's going to swing back and forth between wing spots, and he can play in bigger lineups, or he can play in smaller lineups where he's going to be more of a stretch four. And you look at it on the surface, and you're probably like, well, he doesn't like shoot threes necessarily at volume, but this is where you have to trust your eyes and evaluation as well, because um, he's got multiple years now shooting at a high level, even if he's not jacking shots up, shot after shot, perimeter shot. It looks he's getting more comfortable this year shooting off the bounce, and he's definitely a guy who could shoot it off the catch. So I think he's going to play wherever you need him to play, and I think he's strong enough to guard fours, because
Hmm.
a lot of fours are old threes. Like that's the way the game has moved, and he's got the lateral quickness. Like you said, he's like 225. I know Tyler, Rucker, and Albert went to see him UCLA in Vegas earlier
Hmm.
this year, and he walked by Albert, and now Albert's like, this dude is physically like a beast. And those are the kind of things that you get to see when you see guys live. And to me, you could see it through the screen, but like to see it backed up by the eye test by the guys who went to see him live is a positive thing in my mind. And
No.
I think he's just getting overlooked due to the fact that he's a third year guy. And to me, like, I get it. You're very rarely going to find juniors that are probably going to climb into the top 5. It's got to be outlier situations. But to me, like, he's just a guy that if you're dropping him too far down the board because of his age, like if that's one of the things you're using as a crutch, I get it, because a lot of times it makes sense. But to me, Jaquez is one of the guys where it doesn't necessarily make sense. And I kind of think that he's going to end, like, if they have another deep tournament run, I kind of think he's going to get a little bit of that, like, Chris Duarte buzz as kind of that
Mm.
upperclassman who teams are looking at as maybe having a little bit more potential than he has on the surface.
No, and that's fair. I don't practice ageism. I think it's
Yeah.
gross, Corey. I'm not a big fan of it. Like, I understand if you're coming down to two players that are similar, and you're
Hmm.
like, okay, well, one's a 21-year-old junior, and the other's an 18-year-old freshman, and they're similar. Like, you got to find some way to kind of differentiate the two.
Yeah.
Maybe you just say, okay, the younger guy's got a longer development curve, and
Right.
ultimately will be the better player, whatever. But for Jaime, when I'm evaluating him, the age doesn't really bother me. Like, I'm not a guy who will just ultimately knock down a guy, holistically speaking, because of his class or whatever. I do agree with you on his versatility and even his strength. And one of the things that stands out to me about his game is his post up ability. Now,
Hmm.
I've heard this be discussed in a number of draft circles where Jaime Jaquez's offense isn't really necessarily uh, like the typical shot selection of players of his position, right? If that makes sense. Like the shots that he puts up in college doesn't really look like what other people at his position will put up in the pros, right? So I see a lot of his offense comes from basically bully ball. I mean, he does have the ability to shoot and things like that. But when I heard that and I went back and watched some film, I said, okay, I see a little bit of merit. I don't think that he's, just bound to be a back to the basket scorer or anything like that. But I did notice that a pretty good amount of his diet does come from the post. Now, also, he is capable of being a spot up shooter, so that helps out. Do you look at where his shot variety as being something that could impact his draft status and eventually turn out to actually be a good thing at the next level? Or do you not really see much merit to that argument that most of his shots coming from the inside is a bad thing?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I get it. We've become so obsessed with like looking at it from an analytical perspective that
Hmm.
sometimes we look at what a player does in college and we try to pencil them into that role in the future. Whereas I think that, he's not going to be a back to the basket guy in the NBA, but the NBA a lot of times about finding mismatches. It's about taking advantage of switches. It's about, okay, maybe he didn't get to the hoop by having his back to the basket, but maybe he curled off a screen and now he's got a guard chasing him, and he's still going to have that strength height advantage to be able to score efficiently near the hoop. So I think that, and I think he's a good passer. So if you
Yeah.
tell me he's got a mismatch in the post and somebody is going to double down on him, and that won't happen for years, but I think he's smart enough to make the right read. And the other thing in college, like especially UCLA, they're playing for a championship. They're not
Mhm.
playing to develop NBA players. That's why you're seeing Peyton Watson, his draft stock absolutely tank, because they're not in the business of letting him explore his offensive ability right now. They are in the business of, hey, how do we win a national championship? We got close last year. We got, Juzang was going to enter the draft, right? He tested the waters. He came back. This is going to be our year. We got, this deep, older veteran team. How do we make the most? How do we make everybody fit together? And so I don't think that the role that he plays now is necessarily the way he's going to play in the NBA. Like, I don't think he's going to come in and be some like featured offensive weapon, but I think that the way that he plays tailors his game, that he's just going to be like this excellent role player. And I think you could put him in any system playing off of almost any kind of player, and he'll find ways to make just winning plays and thrive as a winning basketball player. And that might not show up in the stats, and if you're stat hunting, he might not be your guy. But
Mhm.
to me now, right now, he didn't make the top 30 of the latest draft ranking. He's got an average stock price at 33.4 right now. Like, I think there's value there if you're looking at the end of the first round, the early second round, and you're looking for a guy that could step in, help you win some games, and still has a little bit potential to explore with because he's getting better every year and adding a little bit more to his bag.
No, and that's fair. And I think the interesting part of the draft to me, Corey, is when you do get to that late first round, because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily looking for ultimately who's going to be the better talent like 5, 6, 7 years down the line when this player might hit his prime. It's who can contribute immediately. And that's where you probably get a little bit more variance than what your big board might otherwise indicate, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe Jaquez isn't the best player at pick number, I don't know, 20, right? But the team that has the 20th pick, he fits their scheme for one, and he fits a lot of schemes according to you, right, Corey? So
Yeah.
if he fits whatever scheme that's available, and he's a winner already, and he can contribute tomorrow, then what's the harm of taking him at 20 instead of, if you got the 32nd pick, taking him there, right? So it ultimately matters on what the team needs at the end of the day. But Jaquez, as far as where he ranked earlier on in the season for Bleacher Report, he was 42nd. ESPN had him at 41st. The Athletic had him at 26. For the Wins, USA Today's For the Win had him at 27. Sports Illustrated had him at 21. Corey, don't hate me. I had him at 51 or on
Mm.
my top 80. He's since gone up. So spoiler
Okay,
alert for
that's
my
good.
2.0. He's climbing his way up there. And for the no ceilings composite big board, he was 25th overall. So
Yeah.
kind of a wide range there, which is pretty interesting. And I won't read all of his stats. I mean, people know where Sports Reference is to go get a lot of these. But what's interesting to me is if you do go to Synergy, overall offense, he's in the 71st percentile. And then on defense, overall, he's in the 69th percentile, which is nice, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
joke. 69th, nice. Um, a
Nice.
lot of versatility there, right? So exciting stuff for Jaime Jaquez. So Corey, let's move on to the next prospect, and I'm so excited that we scheduled this guy. And when
Yeah.
we set up to talk about this show, we listed guys not knowing where they were going to be like almost a month later. Like I think that we gave the names to each other around 2-3 weeks ago,
Hmm.
and it's kind of a crapshoot at that point. And now we're going to be talking about a guy who is kind of climbing his way back up into the ranks, and that's AJ Griffin out of Duke. Corey, how happy are you to see him succeeding as of late?
Oh, massively, because I was a big time believer in him before the draft, or before the college season, rather. Uh, I loved what he brought in high school when he was actually on the court and not dealing with injuries. I love that he has the pedigree of having a father who's been around the NBA for as long as he has. and he's a great coach, and he's worked with one of the best coaches in Tibbs for a lot of his career, right? Like,
can we pause right there real quick, Corey? I'm sorry to cut you off, but
yeah, of course.
You're a coach, and I love learning people's philosophies and how they evaluate stuff. I think that's the coolest part about what we do is learning how other people evaluate. How much stock do you put into a player that has the bloodline of coaches, basketball players, etc.?
I think that I like to evaluate people on an individual basis, but I definitely think that it helps because you understand what the process is. You understand what it's like to be a professional. You understand the work ethic. You know all of the things that some other players may have to figure out. You've been having this ingrained in your mind for probably as long as you can remember. So I think that it's an advantage. And when you look at a guy like AJ Griffin, like, he also has the physical tools to go along with the advantage of having a father who's been around the game for so long. So, it's not like Steph or Seth where you were looking at maybe like, are they going to be able to hold up physically? How are they going to be able to guard, whatever, ignoring the fact that they were outlier shooters. There were questions about their physicals. Like AJ Griffin, you look at him, and I saw him live when they played Kentucky in the Champions Classic, and I was watching him warm up, and I was like this dude, like, he looks like
a specimen, right?
Looks like a football player. He looks like a football player more than a basketball player. Like, dude's traps were like, I was like, all right, this dude can go out and maybe get like 3 catches for 24 yards and for Duke's football team probably tomorrow without learning the playbook.
I mean, it's Duke football, so I mean, that's fair.
Well, that's why, I'm not a blue blood program, but yeah, I definitely think it matters, and I think you see it a lot at every level. Like, when you're learning basketball, even at high school level, like if you have a family of coaches, like the coach's son, like that cliche, like they have advantages if ignoring nepotism a lot of times because they know what is expected of them, right? They don't have to learn the system. They already know the system. They have that just drilled in their mind. They're probably watching film growing up when a lot of kids don't watch film until they probably get to be D1 players. Like, if they're watching film, they're probably watching like highlight mixes, like
YouTube,
their own
right?
mixtapes. Yeah, like, and granted, a lot of these guys, these guys are going to prep schools, they're going to places where they're actually doing like full-on film breakdowns and whatnot. But just for your average kid, like they're not going on Huddle to actually try to break down defensive rotations. They're trying to post their their 3-point make on Instagram. So I definitely think that there's an advantage to it. But this AJ Griffin situation is bizarre, is all I'll say. And I haven't.
What's made it so weird? I know, but like let's walk down that path, man, because this was a guy who had like top 5 buzz coming into the season.
Yeah, he was like you said, a top 5 prospect coming into the year, and for good reason, because he theoretically represents like the exact kind of player that every NBA team wants to draft at that spot of the draft. But look, what's weird is that when he has been getting minutes recently, right? Like, he's been really performing well. His percentages are outrageous. He looks the part. He passes the eye test. He's obviously, he's returning from an injury that he had preseason, so you kind of expected him to come along slowly. But the thing that has gotten me, because his stock is kind of all over the place, right? Like, some people still have him as like a top 10 potentially lottery guy. Some people have really just kind of lost all hope because they
ESPN quit on him. They had him, I think, at 42nd.
And that's my thing. ESPN had him at 42nd in their top 100.
That's insane.
And they didn't even have him in the top 60 picks in the mock draft that Jonathan Gavoni's mock draft. He didn't even get drafted in the top 60, which released a couple of days ago. Now, obviously, you're looking at talent and whatnot, and you're like, all right, well, what's going on here? Because when he's getting on the court, he's performing. And look, those ESPN guys, like, I'm not one of those guys who are, and maybe I'm a little biased in that, but I'm not one of those guys that are like, oh, ESPN, the media, like whatever,
They're
they're
the boogeyman, right? Like,
hot take guys, right? Like, no, the ESPN draft guys, they know their stuff. Like, they really know their stuff, and they have more contacts than every amateur draft analyst on Twitter. In probably the first letter of their phone going through their Rolodex, right? Like, just straight up. So
yep.
to me, this is a thing. I'm just like, there's something deeper in this story that they would just free fall him down their rankings and then also not even have him going in the mock draft. And I honestly, I don't have an explanation for it, because you could explain the slow start by injury and whatnot, but I can't explain the free fall because he's getting way less of a leash than just about every other prospect that I think I've ever seen be evaluated.
Well, I mean, consider too that we've had guys in recent history, right? Like a Michael Porter Jr. or an OG Anunoby, guys who dealt with injury in school and were touted to be top 10, top, even maybe number one pick in Michael Porter Jr.'s case,
Yep.
but still ultimately ended up being first round selections. I don't know if it's kind of the laws of movement here, where like for as far as one way you can go with a guy, you have to go equal or greater distance the opposite way when they struggle, right? So for AJ Griffin, I'm looking here. Tankathon, I think, has him 9th. Bleacher Report 7th. The Athletic 6th. He was 13th overall. Well, while he was struggling, I still had him as a lottery guy, because why not take a gamble on a guy who is top 5 level talent that late? And I think on No Ceilings, your composite board, y'all had him 10th overall for your first iteration of that. So a lot of people still hanging on, but I'm looking at USA Today's For the Win had him 34th, and Sports Illustrated had him 32nd to go along with that 42nd spot overall for ESPN. You're right, man. A lot of variance there. And it's crazy to me that an injury that he's already come back from kind of early relative to what was expected when that was initially announced that he did have that injury. You're right. Maybe a lot of that had to do with, maybe practices or Coach K or things like that, but they're still giving him minutes. So it's very perplexing. But while he's on the court, we'll get to what matters here. He, in his limited playing time, he's averaging 6 points per game, about 2.5 rebounds, almost 1 assist, a block, half a steal per game, shooting 50, 40, 100% from the free throw line. That's pretty good, right, Corey? 50, 40, 100.
It's not bad.
And it's a start,
Yeah. There's something to work with, right?
Yeah, so some room to play with there. How about this on synergy and his overall offensive percentile? He's in the 99th. I think that's pretty good.
That's not bad.
Only in the 53rd percentile on defense. So, his defense could use a little bit of work. But overall, I mean, that's looking at a guy, Corey, I don't know how you're feeling about him now, but his play as of late is very encouraging. I would probably be inclined to start bumping him up a little bit, even higher from where I initially had him. How about you?
Yeah, I never wavered. So for me personally, I'm not shocked, and I was the guy who was like, we definitely need to be patient with him, and most of the team at No Ceilings was. There were a couple of people that kind of panicked, but that's fine because obviously a lot of big outlets did as well. And it's when you have a guy who has dealt with as many injuries as he has, you start seeing why guys are going to fall. Like you mentioned Michael Porter Jr. He went, what was it, 14? Was it 14th or 13th, 14th to the
It was
to the Nuggets?
14th, 15th to the Nuggets. It was right around there. Like I think it was 14th.
Yeah, borderline lottery type stuff. And you're looking at some of these teams that are passing on him, and you're like, all right, like, geez, like those medicals must be bad. But then you see situations like last year, like Zaire Williams, who was he was atrocious. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's not any kind of which way to kind of think that he showed consistent flashes. He was just bad. He was one of the worst prospects in the whole draft, and he went 10th, and somebody traded up for him. So when I look at AJ Griffin, I'm like, why would a team look at AJ Griffin differently if there was a lot of buzz for a guy like Zaire Williams? Like when AJ Griffin gets into workouts, he's gonna murder those workouts. Like
he's a tank, dude. He's just he's a freak of nature, and that's what kills me about what ESPN did. And again, I'm not criticizing them or asking for their credentials to be removed or anything like that. But when I look at a guy like AJ Griffin, I might even be able to forgive a first. Like it would be really hard, but I might be able to forgive someone for not taking him in the first round. But second round, why the heck not? Like why on earth would you not want to take a guy who top 5 level ability there.
Brandon
But
Boston.
that's
You know?
true. That's true. It
And
happens all the time, I guess. But
and
look at
AJ
Brandon
Griffin
Boston now.
and AJ Griffin has already shown more flashes than even Brandon Boston did last year at Kentucky. So I personally, unless there is something really, really up, and I don't even know what that could possibly mean. Like, I don't know, some kind of criminal activity. Like, I don't know.
Just
Like,
spits in Coach K's face every
right? Like,
practice. Like, it would have to be nefarious.
yeah, somebody will take a chance on his gifts, his talents, and like I said, like he's gonna kill workouts. He's gonna know what kind of questions are asked because I mean, these guys are coached, but obviously his dad works in the NBA for as long as he has. Like, it's perplexing. It's truly something that I'm just like, this has to be the craziest story in the draft world that no one's really digging in on, and we're just kind of casually observing him free fall on the most reputable outlet in the world.
That's true. So before we move on from him, I have one more question specifically, like at least what you think, right?
Yep.
How much of his limited playing time do you think has to do with the fact that the rest of the Duke team is like really freaking good, and they're obviously wanting to compete for a championship for Coach K's farewell tour, right?
Sure.
I mean, you've got guys like Wendell Moore stepping up, Mark Williams, Trevor Keels, Paulo. How much of it do you think has to do with just bring him along slowly to where he doesn't really mess up the good thing that we have going on right now?
I that's what's happening, and I think that as the season goes along, they'll probably try to, unleash him a little bit more and more in different situations. Because right now he's really only playing lower level competition, but there's going to get to a point, right, where conference play, like he's going to be playing good teams every night, and I think that like they have to play him if they want to win the national championship. Like, obviously all of those guys are fantastic. Wendell Moore is been borderline dominant, right? Like, Paolo is probably going to go number 1 overall. Like, they have all of these pieces, but he is this X factor guy. Like, what team has an AJ Griffin off the bench? Like, there are very limited amounts of teams that could afford to do that. So I think they're going to have to do that because, I mean, he's just another guy with this crazy athleticism who can find his own shot. And obviously, like, he's playing within the team construct when he's in. Mysterious, but I think they're going to have to if they want to go all the way.
Yeah, the best version of this Duke team has to feature AJ Griffin at some point, right? So, all right, we will move off from him and on to next prospect, Terence Shannon Jr. Now, this is a guy who has, a pretty decent amount of college basketball experience. There are a lot of folks, Corey, that I've been talking to that had him as an early second-round level talent even last year. I think he comes back this season. He's more efficient overall. I don't think that you can argue that. Like, his shot selection has improved. Even the shot diet has improved, I would say, as well. Defense, about the same. I don't think that he's, scratched any below the surface level defensive talent that wasn't there last season, which there might be some more potential in that area. But Terence Shannon Jr., I'm pretty high on him. On my 1.0, I had him 14th. He has since come down a little bit, but I still have him as a first-round level talent. I really like his game a lot. Corey, left-handed shooter, always kind of funky for me to evaluate a lefty shooter just because it's weird how much the other side of the body can affect your judgment in evaluating a shot,
Absolutely.
right? Or at least for me, I'll speak for myself. But when you watch Terence Shannon Jr., Corey, have you noticed a substantial difference between his play last year to this year? And overall, how do you evaluate him?
I think he's probably in a similar situation to Jaquez as far as where his range is going to ultimately end up being. I do think he's probably more likely to be taken in the second round than the late first. But it wouldn't shock me if a team did take him because he's athletic. He does defend. The shot has improved, absolutely. I think the range is a little bit better. He's not a knockdown shooter by any stretch of the imagination, right? And that's probably the one thing that you wanted to see him actually become, like a guy who's shooting 37, 38% from 3 throughout the course of a year. But to me, he's like I wish he was bigger. That's my thing. I wish he had like an extra 2 inches because, he has like a little bit of that like RJ Barrett Kelly Oubre kind of lefty downhill, attack the basket kind of game. He'll try to, put it down on you. You give him room. Like he's an absolute terror in transition. But there are holes that he definitely has to kind of fix up. Lefties, like you said, they're kind of hard to even defend for players for whatever reason. Your body gets all messed up. You're all of a sudden maybe you're shading a guy a different direction, which is not necessarily counterproductive to what the team structure is telling you to do. But for a guy who is athletic as he is, when he gets downhill to his right hand, he becomes very he tries to be more crafty than physical, right? And he's throwing up floaters, leaning instead of going and finishing with his right hand. So I think the fact that he is just so left-hand dominant at this moment is something that is worrisome. It's not as worrisome because he's a lefty. It's way easier as a lefty to be one-hand dominant than it is for a righty, and he does have NBA athleticism. But to me, it's like he's going to be a role player, and he's a 3-and-D prospect more than anything else, and he's got to be able to show that the three part can come along, because the defensively, like, he's a good defender, but he's not, in my opinion, good enough or projects good enough at the NBA level that, like, you look at him as an outlier kind of defender, like maybe you did a Davion Mitchell last year, where he came in right away and was like, he had the respect of everybody, right? Like he's just going to be another wing in a league full of wings. So, and especially off ball, like he gets lost a lot of times, kind of hunting for steals in the passing lanes and whatnot. He doesn't keep his head on a swivel all the time. So I think he's like a second round guy probably. But there's still so much season left to be played that if he gets hot and he starts showing a little bit more of the consistent shooting, he can absolutely be a guy who plays his way into the first round.
Yeah, and I think that shooting has gotten better compared to last season.
Yeah.
He's almost at 36% right now on pretty solid volume too. So I think too that the mechanics could be cleaned up a little bit, but I mean it's not bad. And I mean, if you look at the free throw percentage, Corey, I don't know how much of an indicator to you that free throw percentage equates to 3-point success, but 85% from the line, not terrible, averaging about 14 points per game. 3 boards, over 2 assists, and a steal per game. So I don't know. I looked at him, man, and I love when I watch a player grow in between seasons, right? Like how you are with Jaquez, when I can watch a guy, go from freshman to sophomore to junior year, and every single stinking year get better. That tells me that you're betting on a guy who is going to put in the work and get better at every level, at every season, right? So I have a soft spot in my heart for players like that. I love guys who are going to just bust their butts every offseason and get better. And that's what I think Terence Shannon Jr. has done. I mean, I think a lot of the questions that were asked for him last season, he's gotten better. I wouldn't say like significantly better. Right. He's not Johnny
but
Davis,
there's progress.
Right? Yeah, but
no,
there's progress.
Yeah,
we could talk about Johnny Davis maybe another time. I mean, that's a whole episode in of itself. But Terence Shannon Jr., man, I think that there's a lot to like there. If you look at the overall offensive percentile, he's in the 81st percentile, and then defensively, about average at 46.
Yeah.
So Corey, we're going to transition now to our last guy, and I talk about expectations not being met. And it's a tricky situation because it's not like Florida State is I don't think that Florida State is that easy of a school to be successful in, because I think there's a specific style of player that they look for. And
they rely on depth as well.
You rely on depth as well. Like right now, Matthew Cleveland is the player that we're talking about. He doesn't start. He might get 20 minutes on a good night unless they go to overtime like how they did against Boston. And he played 30 because there was overtime. Matthew Cleveland on a Florida State team, they like these long, athletic, defensive first.
Yeah.
Just whatever you can give me on offense is bonus. And Matthew Cleveland right now, he's in the 53rd percentile on defense, 40th percentile on offense. I just watched the game today just to kind of refresh my mind on him, because out of all these players, he's the guy that I've watched the least amount of film on, and I got to get more into some Cleveland
Rightfully
tape.
So, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these guys that right now he might not even get drafted, in my opinion.
No.
Right now, Corey, he may not even come into the draft this season.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation, and one thing I love about you guys over at No Ceilings is that never judge a guy for making the right decision and wanting to
Correct.
go back for another year of school to get better and improve his draft stock. So I think that's where we're at with Matthew Cleveland, Corey. When you watch this film, man, like there's flashes there. There's reason
Yes.
there. He gives you reasons every game to be like, oh, okay, like I can see what the hope was preseason. But explain like what's going on with Matthew Cleveland right now at Florida State, Corey.
Well, to me, it's just a case of him being a little raw.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that he wasn't like unbelievably hyped up coming into the year, but there were outlets that did have him in the top 10. Like, and so
He was
there
a first
was
round guy for a lot of places, though.
for a lot of places he was a first round guy. And when you look at him, you look at the last couple of drafts, right? You see Scotty Barnes, you see Patrick
Mm-hmm.
Williams, and you look at Matthew Cleveland, you go, okay, I see what they're doing here. He's going to come off the bench, he's going to do a little bit of everything. He's not going to put up massive numbers, and he's going to play his way into the lottery. And I even when I was watching his some of his like AAU games, he played with Jabari Smith and JD Davison, right? And it's like, okay, he's playing with
They're pretty good.
They're pretty good. They're all right. You could check them out if you got a few minutes.
Google them. It's worth a Google.
Yeah. And so you're like, all right, like he's kind of like this guy who's playing with this talent. He's learning how to play kind of as like this off-ball wing off of guys who are going to potentially be lottery picks. But he's a little raw. Like defensively, there's a lot to like. He's got a great block percentage, and I think that playing in Florida State's defensive system, where they're just switching everything and you're guarding up, you're guarding down, it's so valuable when looking at projections towards the NBA. And you've seen Devin Vassell and Patrick Williams and Scotty Barnes have success there and not be intimidated when they do step into the league. But the difference is I think that his offense, he doesn't have that standout skill that Devin Vassell was able to be a shooter, right? Scotty Barnes was a playmaker. Patrick Williams had a little bit of that off the bounce pull up ability that you saw these flashes.
Pretty solid cutter too.
So. Yeah, right. Like so, you saw these kind of outlier these skills that popped, and he doesn't really have any of that, right? Because if he's not finishing at the rim, he's kind of a train wreck right now. He's hit 1 3-pointer.
Out of like 13 or 14 attempts. Yeah, he's shooting 7% from deep. Like that's hard to do.
I think he's shooting around 50% from the free throw line. So for a guy who's looking like a slasher finisher who can't shoot threes, you at least got to convert if you're going to be a wing at the free throw line to bump up that efficiency. And to me, like the whole story is like, okay, he's just not anywhere close to being ready for NBA projection because he just doesn't have the offensive skills to even flash in college yet. Right. Like he doesn't have like, okay, maybe he's shooting 27% from 3-point line, but he hit this, really fancy off the dribble three that you can get excited about and be like, all right, maybe there's something to work with. He doesn't have anything like that. So he's a guy that is a prime candidate to return next year, in my opinion. And that's fine. And Devin Vassell was a 2-year guy.
Yeah. I mean, you have these 2-year guys. I mean, look at this draft class. So the top of this year's draft class is going to be littered with multi-year players at the collegiate level. And I think that's where Matthew Cleveland should go. And I don't know if it's necessarily staying with Florida State. I don't know if he maybe looks to go to a different school. I don't think it's necessarily the school or the system that he's in right now, Corey, that's the issue. It's just,
I think he's in a good system.
He's in a really good system. I mean, Florida State, even if he doesn't live up to, the 3 players that you mentioned before, he might get that benefit of the doubt just because of the school that he plays for and
Raekwon
how
Gray,
there's players that succeed there, and he's built like they are, and he does kind of fit that same kind of mold as they do. One thing that I couldn't help but keep thinking about, and I tried to Google it, and I couldn't find anything kind of saying this, but he looks like a player that came to the game of basketball late, in my opinion, Corey. Like, he's really gifted athletically, but I see things like when he gets back on defense, he just goes to the guy that's closest to him, although he's already being guarded, and he'll leave a guy like wide open
instead of picking up ball or That's a constant theme with my high school team that we try to hammer out. So
don't just pick up the first guy you see. You know, if the same color as your jersey is on them. Go find somebody else, right? Put a body on someone else. But I don't know if you kind of picked up on that too, Corey. Or maybe you have some insight that you can enlighten me on. But he looks like a guy that just kind of came to basketball a little bit later, and which is okay. But
Sure.
he doesn't feel like a feel guy right now. He's just really gifted
Right.
athletically. He shows flashes of being able to finish. And again, let's just talk about these shooting percentages. I don't want to I want to do this in a positive way, Corey, because 7%, that's really hard to do. I don't think that I could do that even if I
Yeah.
wanted to, right? And then 52, almost 53% from the free throw line. But when I look at the shot, dude, it doesn't look nasty. It really doesn't. Like
No.
it's not the best shooting form that I've ever seen in my life by far, but I've certainly seen worse. Like how much of do you think that it's the shooting mechanics or is it just like the worst luck ever?
Well, it's certainly not the worst luck ever, but when young shooters struggle, it's usually because their mechanics are not consistent. Um, it's usually because they are having sloppy footwork. They're not maybe they're hopping into some shots, maybe they're stepping into other shots. They're not squared up. They're maybe thinking about the process. It's not fluid. It's not natural. And he's a guy that felt way more comfortable in the mid range, pulling up from there. So
Mhm.
it's way harder to extend your range and be that pull up guy, especially when you're maybe a guy who gets a little bit more elevation in the mid range, right? And now you're trying to control it a little more. It's just about getting reps and consistency, and he clearly doesn't have that. And I think one of the things that we have to remember with raw prospects, these last 2 years have been the most outlier of outlier developmental years that any prospects have probably ever experienced, because this pandemic had it threw a real wrench into what these guys are able to actually get on the court in a real way, right? Like there was not court time, there were not runs, a lot of AAU was not happening. So you need reps, you need actual game minutes, and a lot of these guys did not get that. Like we were talking before we went on, like at
Mhm.
every level, my high school guys, we've been playing good. Shout out to my team.
Shout out to Corey's team.
Big dub yesterday, and
Coach of the year, Corey Tulaba
uh
right here.
they didn't have they played an 8-game season last year in 21 days. That's because that's what we were able to fit in, right? And they didn't get off-season, fall league, spring league, summer league. There just weren't a lot of things. So, like, for a guy like Matthew Cleveland, who just needed that, like, he
Yeah.
really needed that, I would expect going forward, hopefully, now that he's around the Florida State team, they'll be able to pick up on what he needs to develop. He's actually getting he's getting minutes against high-level competition. Like, these are all positive steps going forward for him. And maybe now he can carve out a role, because he's obviously, like, he doesn't have any flashes of, like, okay, superstar. He could stay and he could have like a Jaden Ivey type year next year, but he could be an elite superstar at a position of need in the NBA if he just puts in the work, finishes everything, hits his free throws, and is just showing a little bit of improvement with the three ball. He doesn't have to come out and be a 40% shooter next year, right? He just has to be adequate that you have to close out on him, and he could attack the hoop and show off some of that stuff. And if he watches film, he works hard, I think he can come back and have a big year next year, because he does have athletic tools. And those are the hardest things those are the things you can't teach.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer that you don't need them. Like you need a baseline level to play in the NBA, obviously,
Sure.
but you don't need them, right? And like to get there, what you need is an understanding and a feel. And if he can get just a little bit of that and show development, I think that he could be a guy who can actually be the guy that maybe some people were hoping was going to happen this year.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I wonder how much of it too is the fact that he's coming off the bench and trying to find your way in the flow of the game when the
Sure.
game has already taken place, and then you're just trying to insert yourself into what's already happening on the court too. So that might be a little bit adjusting to a higher level of competition
Yep.
and then
New
coming off the bench.
teammates. Yeah. New role. Absolutely. All of that is stuff to take into consideration. And everybody develops at their own pace. And just because he's a guy that could have possibly been a first rounder this year, it doesn't mean he can't get better next year. Like it happens every year that there are guys that start out as potential first round or some, even lottery guys in some people's opinions, and they don't pan out. But they come back and they work hard and they make the improvements to get into that spot in the next year. And that's okay. That's okay, because it just takes time sometimes. Shout out
Sometimes
Tyler
it
Rucker.
just shout out to Tyler Rucker. It takes time sometimes. And hey, I mean, guys have improved their stock in the very young season so far. I mean, maybe he just gets hot one month. He wakes up and
Absolutely.
just decides to actualize that potential a little bit. So still a lot of college ball left to go, but not a lot of showtime left here, Corey. You like that segue? I think that was the
Love it.
smoothest one I think I've ever
Love it.
done. But Corey, I want to thank you so much for making some time to come here on Draft Capital and chop it up with me, man. Your insight, just being able to interact with you one-on-one is a treat in itself. The fact that you'll entertain my thoughts and ideas about college hoops, man, it means a lot to me. And I don't think I'll ever get over the fact that people want to talk basketball with me, man. It's always a joy and a pleasure.
Same.
But man, just major shouts to you and to the Draft Act podcast. Been listening weekly. You guys have been killing it. I know that you got a lot of great video content coming down the pipe.
Yes.
And as always, I tell people, man, that if I ever have like a graphic design question, like you're now my dude, like you've actually influenced my big board that's going to be coming out here within the next couple weeks. So I can't thank you enough for the time that you take out for me, for the show, for the draft Twitter community. I know draft Twitter gets a lot of hate sometimes, but it's actually a cool place, whenever you're interacting with the right people, man. So appreciate you. But before we cut you out, why don't we give you the opportunity one more time just to tell the fine listeners here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio where they can find you and Albert's work and the rest of the No Ceilings team.
Yeah, you could find the Draft Act podcast anywhere it's available. We have a massively big guest scheduled for next week. So if you haven't subscribed yet,
it's not me. If anyone was wondering, it's not me. But
no, but you're gonna be on soon. You are. No, you are.
That's not where I was going. I appreciate that, but it was just a little humor there. But yeah, man.
No, we're gonna do a home and home. It's not you, but it's a pretty massive guest. So it's gonna be exciting. So you could find my YouTube channel at the NBA Draft Dude, like you said. A lot of people who first find me, they find me through YouTube. They watch my scouting videos, and this year I've decided that I need to take it to a new level. You talked about my kind of artistic background. I really love bringing that aspect to the draft community, and I think
that's what makes you great, in my opinion, dude. Is like
me too.
You're wicked smart, but the fact that you can I'm like a moth to flame with anything you put out, man. It's all great stuff.
Yeah, the basketball. I'm pretty all right at the basketball stuff, but the art, nobody's touching me.
The showsmanship of it, right?
So I'm very proud of the direction. To be clear, I haven't filmed it yet, but I have it all mapped out in my head, and I think it's gonna turn out really cool. And it's gonna be my scouting reports that's my favorite thing that I do, because I get to really, in an in-depth way, show and teach people about these prospects and point out little things like how Jabari Smith looks for a body when he rebounds. And that's not something that you're probably going to see on TV or a highlight reel, but that stuff is cool and it matters. And that's the kind of thing that I get to do in these film breakdowns. So NBA Draft Dude, subscribe to the channel. And the No Ceilings crew, we're writing every single day, Monday through Friday. Really unique content every day, in-depth video, written word. Just I think what we're doing, nobody else has been able to do as consistently as we have in the draft space. And you can get it sent right to your email every day, because it's we're doing it through Substack. So that's noceilings.substack.com. Subscribe for free. You won't be sorry. And if you are, you can DM me about it at Corey Tulaba on Twitter and be like, you told me to subscribe. Your site sucks. And I'll be like, all right, man. Or cool. Or lady, or they, all right, I'm sorry, you can unsubscribe, but I promise you'll like it. So that's where all the places you could find my work and the No Ceilings team. And again, we've just been cranking out some really good stuff. Nathan does a Monday article every week that is takes me 45 minutes to read. And
I love the morning dunk.
Yeah, Alex is at Draft Film School, is doing great stuff. Tyler Metcalf, I mean, he's killing the No Ceilings podcast. He's doing the Friday Screener Rucker does, he's all right.
I mean,
He's
you got to
whatever,
you get what you get with him, right?
He kind of he's just there. And Albert's my guy, and Evan's killing it. Nick is killing it. I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff. We're going to be doing some Twitter Spaces more often. We're trying to do it big, man. And if you're a fan of the draft, and obviously if you're listening to this show, you're a big fan of the draft, and you should check out the crew, because we're trying to do our best here. And shout out to you guys. I'm glad that you started your own draft show and got into the space with the Off the Ball Network. I love that. I love how the space is growing. I think that if you're interested in it even a little bit, and you want to pursue it, the more the merrier. And it's all about community, and this is an awesome community. So I'm happy that we get to share this community together now.
Yeah, man, it means a lot to me to hear you say that, and I echo a lot of the same sentiment, man. Like, the draft Twitter community, it gets a bad rap, but we love you. We love you guys. You guys are amazing. So, if you want to follow myself, you can do so on Twitter at Stephen G Hoops. You can follow me on Instagram at Stephen W Gillespie. To be honest with you, you're better off hitting me up on Twitter. You can follow Draft Capital on all platforms at Draft Capital NBA. If you're listening to the show because you're following us on the podcast, which is available anywhere you get your podcast, something cool going on, and I'll plug, Draft DAC and No Ceilings as well. Spotify now has a new 5-star rating that they implemented, so would highly encourage and would love for all of you guys to hit Draft Capital, Draft DAC, and the No Ceilings podcast with a 5-star. That would help all of our, respective platforms grow a lot, and we would love you even more for it. But for my guest here, Corey, for myself, for the Off the Ball Network, for the fine people on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, for Built Bar, this has been Draft Capital. We will catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody.